Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live show for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And folks, these are live conversations. We are coming to you live noon Eastern time here on the eastern part of the United States. And as I like to say, these conversations are by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I'm joined today by a gentleman named Paul Logue. He is the Director of Solutions Consulting International with a company called Emburse. More importantly, he has a 25-year musical professional musician career and IT career. And he has recently been publishing content under the name The Pre-Sales Rockstar. And that is precisely what we're going to be talking about today, which is what does it take to become a pre-sales rock star? And because Paul is literally, he has literally spent decades playing music before adoring fans on a stage, we're going to talk about how is it, or what are the similarities between being a pre-sales professional and a rock star. Paul, good to see you, my friend. Thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm good, Chris. Thank you very much. It's just gone 5 in the evening in the UK, so end of the working day for me, but delighted to be here to talk to you.
Well, I'm glad you could join. And as you recall, you and I connected, 3 or 4 months ago.
Yep.
And I don't remember exactly what brought us together, but I remember just having a brief conversation, loving the conversation we had, hearing that you have literally been on stage performing for fans for decades and saying, you know what, Paul, you got to bring this message to this community. By the way, we've already had somebody say hello. Alvaro from Spain says hello, 1805. Alvaro, thank you for spending a little bit of time in your evening with us. Folks, if you're out there and care to say hello, please feel free to do so. We do not see you out there. And by all means, if you have any questions for Paul or myself, please chime in. We have another person chiming in. Claudia, nice to see you, Claudia. My good friend Ron, it's not quite time for a pint for us, Ron. He's in the Central Time Zone, so he's even an hour behind me. Paul, let's begin. I gave a brief introduction, but let's begin, if you don't mind, by sharing a little bit about your background and how it is that you actually got into pre-sales.
Well, this might be a long one. I'll try and keep it short, but as short as I can do. And apologies for the Scottish accent, guys. I wish we could all sound like Sean Connery, but we don't.
By the way, I have to say I have some serious accent envy there. I absolutely love that accent.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, if I go back to 1995, about kind of you're just short of 30 years ago, that was my first record deal. I would be aged 19, so I'll let the arithmeticians amongst you work out my age. But that was the first record deal I got, and that was with a local band. So I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, and this was a local band playing all original music. We were called Cry Havoc, actually was the name of the band. And it was my first foray into music. I'd always been in bands since about age 15. It started at high school, naturally. I started out as a drummer, and even though I have guitars beside me, my actual main instrument is bass, and I fell into playing bass because we couldn't find anybody that wanted to play bass. I think most bass players will tell you they're frustrated guitar players, but I loved that music, that actual instrument, and really grew to love it, and went through the whole process of learning, against rock records. I was self-taught, so don't read music at all. But I started to, my real forte was actually writing music. So in all of the bands that I've been in, I've been the main composer, lyrics and music. And it was definitely like I would say a hard rock band. So I grew up listening to the likes of AC/DC, Zeppelin, Iron Maiden were the big British influence, Def Leppard, very radio friendly rock in the 80s, of course, coming into the 90s when I get into it. And I think at that age, Chris, my hair was to here, by the way. Can you believe that?
I think you sent me a picture,
Yeah,
and yes,
yeah.
you definitely had the rockin' hair
Absolutely.
going.
It's almost impossible to imagine that, but it was dark, wavy, like Jim Morrison. It was that kind of look as well, and that was my passion in life. And to give you a background of my family, my dad was an executive at IBM as well, so
Hmm.
he was always pushing me, and he was a high flyer, a real high flyer in IT, and manufacturing was his kind of forte in life. So he was a real expert, one of the first kind of adopters of that supply chain management. So I'd always heard about my dad's interest in computers, and they were always around the house. So he when he first kind of got into his real profession, he would bring home bits of computers. I remember stacks of green and white lined IBM
Oh yeah.
paper, the kind of duplex printers, etc. You name it, they were around the house. And I think that was the first kind of interest in it. And as my music career was beginning to take off, I actually ended up, well, I was studying IT at college, so went to Central College of Commerce in Glasgow, and then Paisley University. And I don't mind admitting that I dropped out of university after second year,
Hmm.
because it was more, for me, it was more programmed orientated. And in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing now. I'd like to go back and give my younger self a slap, but it didn't work out too badly. But I think what I was finding out at the time, that my brain was more in the kind of discovery and the requirements gathering stage.
Hmm.
That's where I really excelled. And I actually wanted to make a change of course, but I was too late into the course that the guy said, look, you just need to take the rest of the year out. And lo and behold, one of my friends had a job in one of our major banks in the UK doing sales. And that's where I then moved into. So I managed to pass all of my lending examinations. So I was actually a 19-year-old kid giving out mortgages, car loans, house,
Wow.
furnishing loans, a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't a particularly high paid job, but it allowed me to put some money in my pocket, buy guitar strings, follow my passion.
Yeah.
And wasn't a bad seller. So I was starting to get my first foray into sales. Um, Round about this time as well, maybe in a period of 2 years, the band made an album. We lived the whole rock and roll story of being signed, made the record label said, yeah, it's good, but it's not good enough, and dropped the
Hmm.
band. Or no, in fact, they didn't drop us yet, but the album just did not come out. So we would spent 2 years of gigging, etc. And then I met my wife through a mutual friend in the bank, and we got engaged. And at that point, my dad stepped in and said, you will not support a wife on that measly bank wage that you're on, son. You're going to have to think of a different career." Now,
Hmm.
even though he was an executive, there's no way he could get me a job at IBM, but he could
Hmm.
certainly tell me when jobs were coming up. And that's what he did do. He pushed me towards IBM. Were opening a centre within, they had a plant which was a mile and a half long. It employed
Wow.
5,000 people. So they made
Wow.
laptops, servers, desktops. It was still very much a manufacturing hub. And I came in as an account manager in their order desk, where they were actually taking in orders, building kit, and sending it out to all the high street places, so a UK
Hmm.
equivalent of Best Buy, etc. And that was my first journey into IBM, and I really, really loved it. And after a short period of time, people in IBM started to recognize my technical skill set. So I moved into different roles. I even got earmarked as a Java programmer, got sent to college paid by IBM to go and learn Java programming. And then I fell into doing, as we come out of that, I fell into doing application management services, which was really just a business analyst role. And
Hmm.
that's what I loved. My forte was in front of people,
Yeah.
talking to customers, understanding their pain points. I didn't know that pre-sales existed, but I was doing all of the key facets of the job at that point,
Yeah.
unbeknown to me. And then I actually fell into a travel and expense management team. So number one, we were
Hmm.
rolling out our own Java-based applet for all of IBM employees, because we did raise expenses on a piece of paper. We filled
Wow.
it in an Excel, we handed in our receipts, and the world was moving forward. SAP was round with, they just bought Concur,
Yeah.
and we started doing the internal rollout, and we realized that this might not be a bad product to sell to other customers. So IBM had all of these Fortune 500 clients, and I was looking after people like Johnson and Johnson, Eli
Wow.
Lilly, the big pharma companies, Unilever, Procter and Gamble, and we were just given no training and pushed out to go and sell this to these
Just go
customers.
sell it.
Yeah, just go and sell it. But by the way, once you'd sold it, Chris, you were actually implementing it as well. You were going out
Mm,
and doing the requirements gathering. You were implementing and configuring the system, and it
yeah.
really was like an overnight education. You were learning so many
Mm,
different parts of the job, and all of a sudden they stopped making this product because we realized our competitors were millions of pounds and years ahead of, there was
right.
no mobile technology, for example. It was a Java applet. On the parallel side, I feel like the Gwyneth Paltrow movie Sliding Doors. At the same time, I had this successful music career. So the Glasgow band
Mm,
didn't really do anything, but I kept writing songs. I kept writing for myself. I set up a home digital studio, and I fell into writing songs for other artists and sending them over the early versions of the internet. I can't even remember what I was using, but something like You Send It, if you
mm,
remember that, way before
yeah.
Dropbox.
Yeah.
I was uploading the file of my song. I can sing a little bit, so I can give someone an idea of what the vocal should
What it
be
might
like.
sound like.
Exactly, but I was getting the recording back with a professional rock singer on it, and it blew my mind. And I thought, "Wow, that's amazing!" And I managed to make friends with a really successful German producer, and he kept asking me, "Hey, can I get a rock ballad in the style of maybe Whitesnake? Can you do something up tempo like Aerosmith?" And I would just write these songs within a few hours,
It's
record them, and
amazing.
send them. And the guy was saying to me, "Where are you getting this material from? Why are you not in a band? You need to do something with this." And at
Right.
this point, I actually had a daughter, so I now had a family as well to look after. And what he gave me the idea to do was, I'm comfortable, I'm happy at home because I've got responsibilities. My career was going
Mm,
okay, but I'm now this dad. I don't want to go and pursue the dream of touring and playing in small pubs that my old band used to do. So what I decided to do was try and write songs and send them around the world and create a band digitally. So it took me 6 months to find people, and it was a combination of networking, which is part of what we do in our business, but it was also looking through forums of like-minded individuals, trial
mm,
and error, seeing if they fitted, almost like building a pre-sales teams in many ways.
mm.
And eventually I settled on 5 musicians. Not one of them I knew. Not one of them I
Amazing.
knew. What singer was in America, in Chicago. The drummer was in England. The keyboard player was German, and so was the actual guitarist. And we made a complete album, which I wrote. Everybody loved the songs, which thankfully they did. But I'm very open to partnering if anyone wanted to write. But we sent them out, and I said to the guys, "Look, think of me as the guy that does the stencil black and white pencil drawing. You are the artists of your own instrument.
Mm,
You bring the color." And I gave them creative license to do what they want. And there was a little bit of, maybe production involved where, look, try this, try that. Not a lot. And we finished a full album. We put it out and got signed very, very quickly to a rather large German record label.
mm.
And they flew us to Germany. We got our first photo session, and we actually met each other for the first time
That's
after
amazing.
the record was done. And it then came out about 6 months later, and it went straight into the charts in Japan. And we were like, "Oh dear, what's happening here?" So that was the start. The band was called, you probably asked me, but the band was called Eden's Curse.
Right.
So after the Garden of Eden, and it went straight into the charts in Japan, and I think we sold 10,000 copies of the first album. So it was quite an amazing time. Because I had a very newborn baby, I kept writing songs, and the label saw the success flying through the whole of Europe, actually, the whole world. Actually, we sold well in Brazil and all different countries across Europe. They said, "How quickly could you get a second album done?" And I said, "To be honest, I've got enough material for 3 albums." So we quick,
Wow.
we quickly selected the next batch of songs, recorded it, and the second one was out in under a year. So we had 2 albums out within the space of a calendar year, and that one went even bigger. That went into the top 10 rock albums in Japan, and it just snowballed and snowballed from there. So the career on music went for 15 years, and this was just at the time where IBM, the career with the travel and expense software was going well, but they actually decided to sunset the software. So a lot of my American colleagues, a couple of the guys that actually I would say were mentors for me in regards to teaching me everything I knew, moved to different companies. And one guy moved to Chrome River, which was one of the Emburse brands. So he reached out and said, "Hey, I'm a VP now. We've signed Bosch Power Tools. Everybody will know those guys. They signed those guys in Germany, and they needed to create a European team. And would I come and join pre-sales?" And my first question was, "What is pre-sales?"
What's pre-sales?
I had no idea. And so he was in the same job as me. He was doing the implementations plus selling it. And he just said, "Look, you've got a young family. Sometimes when we go, we're on site for 2 weeks. We've got to build these systems. You go in, do the demo, and you disappear." And I said, "What? You disappear after a day?" And he says, "And we give you commission for it." I said, "Where do I sign?" So in actual fact, I became the first solutions consultant for the UK. And I am now in the position where I've just hired another chap for the UK, and that's my team coming up to 5 as of next month. So it's grown over the 5 years I've been. And Chrome River, to tell you where Emburse fits in, Emburse is the parent company. We're privately owned. And we have 6 different expense brands, and it's been a really great journey. I love the product. I love the people I work for. And I've got a really amazing passion for pre-sales and trying to network with individuals like yourself. And to answer your question, Chris, your book's top of my pile. So that's how I met you. I've got a new boss within our division, and the first thing he did was buy us all a copy of this, and he gave it out at SKO, and I read it on the flight home and thought, wow, this is just put in paper everything that we do, but such a simple method that we can always, have in the tail. I don't mind showing you this. I actually have your 6 habits laminated because I use it all of the time. And we'll get into why it's comparable to my career in music, but there are so many similarities that when I was beginning my networking, I was trying to think of what my unique selling point was. And I really thought, well, I wonder how many people have had a fairly, I wouldn't say I was super successful, but, we sold probably in the region of 50,000 albums. I've toured all over the world. We had a full, crew that were behind us. We had a full web shop, merchandising deals, all of that, guitar endorsements. It was a pretty successful time, but never enough to overtake the career in IT. And to be honest, I had as much passion for both, really, and that's what I found latterly in life, that this was the thing I was really, really good at, and I loved. That was my hobby. Some people go and play golf, and I just happened to go and melt faces and rock stages.
Paul, I gotta say, it's such an incredible story, and a few people have been chiming in. Alex and Melanie and Clifford and Sherry. Nice to see you all. Sherry said, "What a great backstory." It's really an incredible story on so many levels, and I mean, there's so many more questions that just flood my mind. There is one thing I want to double click on, because I don't think it's something to be overlooked. When you formed the band Eden's Curse, if I understand what you said correctly, you were creating music and you were sending it out to musicians, in essence doing virtual auditions, if I can use that term.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. And then you formed the band with members from not only different countries, but different continents.
Yeah, exactly.
And you actually assembled and released not just a few songs, but an entire album that hit the top of the charts in Japan in particular, before you had ever met each other in person. Did I get that?
Correct.
And what year was that?
So that was the debut album came out in 2007. So we recorded that in 2006. So it came out. In fact, I might be wrong actually, Chris. I think the debut came out. No, I'm right. It was 2007.
Yeah. By the way, Rochelle Cantero says that's amazing. Rochelle, I couldn't agree more. Rochelle was a guest on the show last year or the year last. What's amazing to me about this, Paul, is that this sounds a lot like what has happened to many of us over the past 3 or 4 years since COVID, right? So many of us, and I've experienced this countless times where I've gotten to know people quite a bit through either LinkedIn or over Zoom, and had never met. And in fact, Ron Whitson was tuning in earlier. In fact, he's been on the show as well. That Ron and I it's a perfect example. Ron and I had communicated countless times on Zoom, and then finally met in person. But I don't think too many of us experienced that before COVID. Maybe a little bit, but not very frequently. And yet that was absolutely your experience, which just absolutely blows my mind.
And I'll tell you why. There's a really good explanation on why I did that.
Please.
And I think my job was critical to it because I was in IT. I was aware of technologies that were out there. These weren't the leading AI solutions. These were file sharing systems that maybe graphic designers would use, things like that. So I had basically visibility of them. But also for me, being in a Glasgow band, I was working with what I considered as the best rock musicians in Glasgow, and we didn't achieve anything. Sadly, I mean that was the sad part of it. So if it came to finding another great rock singer, I had the best rock singer in Glasgow. I knew that. So once I found this file sharing system, and it was just sending the song to the producer and it coming back, hearing my song with a singer who was even better than mine, I thought, wow, that was the penny that dropped for me. And I knew, Chris, on paper that this just sounds like absolute fantasy. I knew that this might not work for, if somebody else tried it, they might not have the skill set to pull it off. But I knew, because I was a business analyst background, I knew that I would have the skills. I'm a very organized person. I knew that I could project manage it in essence. And if I took the time to find each component, and when I say component, I mean musician, I wanted a particular style of guitar player and person, because you have to work with these people over a long period of time. So you do have to do a lot of vetting. You have to throw ideas at them and do, as you said, virtual editions. So these guys would record, send it back, and I would start to hear people who sounded the way that I wanted, but maybe their personality wasn't right, or the personality was perfect, but the skill and the musicianship wasn't up to standard, or they didn't look a certain way as well, because I had the foresight to have in my mind's eye anybody that creates anything. You wrote a book, you had that first idea, the seed that grows in your mind, or the seed that plants in your mind is what everything else grows from. I had a very defined vision within my mind of where I wanted to take this to. And 6 months sounds like a flippant thing to say. That is a long time to sit and wait and audition all of these people. But once I got it, and luckily everybody liked the material as well, they were passionate about it. And then following that through. So it's two different things. But here's the point I wanted to make to you. Going from a Glasgow band and working with those Glasgow musicians, this now took my avenue to be the whole world. There was nothing that was going to restrict me. So even having a singer in Chicago, I never thought for a minute that we would have to play this music live. So it didn't bother me where they were based. Were they good? Did they fit what I was after? And it only became a problem latterly once the record label saw that it was selling and said, guys, we need to go and send you on tour. And then having to orchestrate that. If you've ever heard of the phrase of herding cats, it was quite a different thing. And also meeting these people for the first time. It's great having a weekend and a photo shoot and all of the lovely kind of rock star type treatment, but actually going on a tour bus with each other for 2 weeks, living in each other's back pocket. We actually, I don't mind telling you, we fired one of the guys immediately after the tour because we couldn't live with him. So that's the kind of thing that you then start to discover and appreciate about people as well. But it was an unbelievable. I'm very proud of it. In fact, I did try and ask the Guinness Book of Records back in the day if there's ever been another band that's done this, and they said, we're not aware of anyone, but it's a very difficult thing to define that you and definitely say that you guys are the first e-band.
It's a hard category to define.
Yeah, exactly. But we thought, well, it would be a great statement to put out there. And I'll give you another really insight as well, that we did 5 studio albums, we did a live album, we did a DVD, we did a best of, and we did not change that methodology. That worked very successfully for us. And part
Amazing.
of the reason it worked was it gave everybody the comfort to be themselves, be relaxed, and do the best performance they could in their own home without the external pressures of flying halfway around the world. Occasionally, I would go and work with a singer. That happened laterally as we got on and through the process, that we would go to a studio and record as well, because we got more out of that. But the rest of the musicians, everything was recorded completely and utterly remotely. So it saved us a lot of money as well. And look at the way the world changed dramatically with COVID. For me in the UK, we had Brexit into the mixture, which would have hugely complicated my band, because we would have needed work permits to fly to each other's countries. So on paper, it would be a disaster for many people, but for me, I was able to pull it off.
It's really an amazing story. Ron Whitson was just chiming in. This is a pretty cool story. In fact, I think he just shared with online an interview from maybe a magazine. Paul, allow me to just press pause just for a moment. Folks, I'm speaking to Paul Logue. He is the Director of Solutions Consulting International with a company called Emburse. More importantly, he is a lifelong musician. And if you're just tuning in, I'm going to encourage you to go back and listen to the recording of Paul's story about how he literally formed a band by doing virtual interviews back in 2007. They recorded and released an album that went to the top of the charts in Japan before they ever met each other for the first time. And it's really just an incredible story. Now, Paul, I want to shift this conversation to pre-sales and some of the lessons that we and those of us who are in the pre-sales profession can learn from some of what you have learned on this journey. But before we get there, there's one question I got to ask. Yeah. What is, or who is the most well-known or the most famous singer that those of us who aren't as familiar with the Glasgow and Japanese music circuits, most famous singer that has either recorded one of your songs or produced one of your songs, or at least sang one of your songs in one of the recordings that was sent back to you?
Yeah, goodness, I've had quite a few. Most of them will be. I'm just trying to think if there's anybody super huge. So I worked with someone from Queensryche. I don't know if anybody would know those guys. Yeah. So there was a lady who sang on their most successful album. I think probably the biggest one will be Dream Theater. So they are a New York-based band who've sold 20 million albums. Their singer, James Labrie, sang on our 3rd studio album. So he did a duet with our band.
Wow.
And that was really at the height of our peak of our kind of success. And we wanted to do, occasionally we would have a duet, so we had a couple of females duets throughout our career, but we wanted to push the envelope, and trying to get to the bigger artists was always difficult. But Dream Theater were my favourite band, so when it came to working with someone, that was, the pinnacle for me was to work with him for sure. And he was such a lovely guy, and we'll maybe get into talking about pre-sales in a minute and networking, how it's important. My next article that I'm going to write will be titled Access All Areas, and it's about networking with people, that backstage pass, that invitation onto a customer's premises are rights of way that are super crucial to you networking and sales. And also me as a musician, it wasn't just going back and drinking the band's beer and chatting up their girlfriends. It was about networking with extremely important people. And if you've ever read anything about success, it's surround yourself with people who are on an upwards trajectory. So for me, getting a chance to frequent and get to know and, you know, understand how the guys at Dream Theater succeeded. Chris, you're going to love it. What do you think was the first thing that they said?
Hard work, practice.
Yeah, number three, preparation,
Prep.
and your list. Partner with each other, practice religiously. These guys were never off their instrument, even when they were talking to you. And what came out of that was myself and James had a decade-long friendship with each other. And what's happened over the years is every time Dream Theater played my hometown or any of the band members' hometowns, we always had an invitation to come and hang out. The guys are sweet as anything, and I love the fact that they've sold so many albums, but they're still really down to earth. But what James really loved was he kept asking me really detailed questions about my songwriting, and he kept dropping hints that one of these days I'd love to actually, you and I, write something. So fast forward, this would be, let me think now, just before the pandemic hit, maybe a week before the pandemic hit. Dream Theater were playing my hometown. I would always go and meet James, but for whatever reason, I couldn't get him on email. And I actually went to the Czech Republic to see them as well, me and a few buddies. Again, I couldn't get a hold of him. And I'm heading to demo to a client in London. I'm flying through Glasgow Airport, being at the show the night before, and there's the whole Dream Theater band sitting in Starbucks.
Oh, that's
and
amazing.
They spot me walking by, and James comes over and he says, "Do you want a coffee?" And I said, "I'm actually running for the London flight." And he said, "Oh, we're on the London flight as well." So I got a chance to see them all and just have a quick chat and a couple of photos together. But as we were leaving to all walk down to the gate, James kind of pulled me aside and he said, "Look, all of these guys are taking a year off to do some solo albums. I haven't done a solo album for 6 years, and you're the guy that's going to write it for me." And I
Wow.
went, "Yeah, okay." And at that point, part of the story that I haven't said is when I moved to Emburse, I decided to kind of hang up Eden's Curse at that time. So I was kind of retired, and here was my biggest chance to come in and do something with somebody I admired from my favourite band. But we were friends of 10 years at that point, so we were beyond the musician point. And we recorded, well, the pandemic hit a week later, and we recorded and rewrote the whole album together and recorded it all during the pandemic. And it came out, we got signed to Sony, which was unbelievable for me.
Amazing.
And it came out on Sony last May, so it's just going to be about a year old as of next month. And it's under James's name, James Labrie. The album is called Beautiful Shade of Grey, and it is 100% acoustic music as well. So it's not like the heavy rock stuff. It's very like Led Zeppelin 3, where they did a lot of the kind of acoustic-y, Ramble On, that type of thing, Stairway to Heaven. It's a really nice, chilled out record, and yeah, it was unbelievable. I've got a plaque which I can, in fact, I wonder if I could turn this around and let you guys see it. I've got a record on my wall. That's the album there.
Love it.
So,
Absolutely. I think you shared that with me. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
That must have been an amazing experience, and I have not listened to that yet. So and I think I'm a huge music fan. In fact, I had so my favorite band is a band local to Virginia called Carbon Leaf, and I actually had the lead singer of Carbon Leaf on this very show for an interview. And we've actually hired them to play a few private parties for us. And I'm just an enormous music fan. So to hear your story is just so inspiring to me. And I have to admit, I didn't even realize the full depths of your story. And I can't wait. Beautiful Shade of Gray. It's labeled as James Labrie, correct?
James Labrie,
yeah.
Every song on it was written with me. There's one song that I wrote entirely myself, which is called Wildflower. That was lyrics and music by me, but everything else is 50-50. And we did do a cover of a Zeppelin song. I won't spoil it for anyone that wants to go and check it out. But Zeppelin's a tough thing to take on. You're taking on the gods here, so you've got to watch what you're doing. Yeah.
There's a few bands who have tried to do so. Some better than others. So that's brilliant. So Paul, help us now make the transition into pre-sales. What are what are some of the, and I've already sort of identified a few myself, but I
Mhm.
don't want to lead the witness here. What are some of the lessons that you think people in the pre-sales profession can take away or learn from not only your experience, but just the life of a professional musician, the life of a performer?
Yeah. I think they're quite obvious, but I think I'll state them anyway for sure. But I mean, as a performance, we're both in that performance industry. If I know that I loved part of what you said at the outset of the book is we're in sales. Absolutely, 100% agree with it. But we are both performers. We have to have an element of thorough preparation to be successful. And if you've read any of my articles, Chris, I think the first one that I ever did was called the setlist strategy. And that was
Mm,
one of the first aha moments that I got about comparing the two roles together. Because on the floor in front of me on stage would be a set list for what I was performing that night
love
in the
that.
order.
Love
And
that.
to part of what you talk about bringing the big thing to the front. Or even it was Peter Cohen in his great demo book as well. I'm
Absolutely.
not sure many bands adhere to that, but playing their biggest hit at the front because most
Right.
people
I mean,
would
they save
leave.
that for the encore, right?
Yeah, most people would leave. So we definitely build to climax there. But in many ways, you do have to start off. You do have to start off with a big bang.
With a bang.
So
Yeah.
correct. So it might not be your biggest hit, but it could be something that you've got in the radio and circulation at that time. We traditionally did the opening song of our album because our albums always started with a bang. You can't go in with a ballad. It just didn't happen.
Right.
It would
Right.
send the audience to
You
sleep.
put people to
But
sleep. Yeah.
but the other part to that as well, the creation of a set list, I liken to creating an agenda for a demo because, well, number one, you need to know the audience that you're performing, and that was no different for us. So we didn't have the luxury as a brand new band coming out of the gate to have an audience. You've got to create an audience, so that takes many, many years. And one of the ways that we would do that was going out supporting bigger artists like Dream Theater. We did 2 shows in the UK with them. The
Mm,
other band we supported would be Michael Schenker Group, who was an original member of the Scorpions. They were huge. We
mm,
toured all over the UK with those guys, and we had to pick the set list tailored to that audience. What might they be interested in based upon what Michael Schenker sounds like, the type of people they'll attract? Rock's a little bit different to software in many ways because you can like all ranges of rock, you can like all different types of music. So you do have a degree of flexibility where you can just be yourself and it might work, but it is still a chance. You can't win everybody over as well. So
amen.
that set list can take a lot of time and effort and have a lot of thought into it. So it's not just 5 songs in complete random order. There is, let's give the singer a break by doing an instrumental. Let's have a solo section here. Let's calm things down and have a ballad. So that for me was part of the preparation. If I think of each individual, every member of a pre-sales team or sales team or musician, every single person has got a story like me that's led them to where they are today. You're no different. You've talked about it extensively in your book. And there's many, many journeys that they've had to take. So the journey, the line from A to B is never straight. It can be like this. It can sometimes loop round. So that preparation comes in many, many different forms. That my journey started on drums, moved to guitar, and ended up in bass. But beside that is practice for my craft as
Mm,
well. So not just the practice of the actual performance that you're going to do, which I'll touch on in a second, because I talked about this in a recent podcast and the guy couldn't believe what I said. But the actual practice to learn your craft, learn your instruments. So we're the same in pre-sales. And what I was going to get at is my article, the set list strategy, talked about my waking nightmare. In the middle of the evening, I'll wake, sweat on me, and it's being on a stage or being in a boardroom presenting software or playing a song that I don't know. And that
mm,
was my stuff of nightmares. And I always used that as my guiding light to say, I never ever want to find myself in that position. Therefore, I would over practice. I would make sure that I knew every single bit of the song. Can I shut my eyes and play it? Because in actual fact, on stage and in a boardroom, or whenever you're presenting at a webinar, or being out in public speaking to people at a trade show. The interaction with the audience is critical, as you know. It can form the rapport with the audience. It's an addictive drug when you're a musician, to be honest. If you've written your own song and you're staring into the eyes of someone in the front row who's singing every word back, you don't need anything else than that. It's
imagine.
phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. But the same way, I get the same buzz, maybe quite not as euphoric as the music, but I get the same way when I'm showing a feature of our software, or I'm hitting on, this is how I can resolve your pain point, Mr. Customer, and you see it on their face immediately when that is resonate.
The
You
aha
also see
moment.
You also see the flip side when it's going down. My phrase is going down like an elephant on a snowboard. you can see when it's going the opposite way. And that again comes preparation and practice. The other practice element that you talk about, which I absolutely love, is clicking every click. Making sure. I did a demo this morning that was it this morning or yesterday? Yesterday, beg your pardon. I clicked every click. Superb. Went into the demo and every click I clicked went wrong. So it's one of those ones. You've had a day like that today, Chris, where you just can only control what you can control, and you get yourself through that performance. And to be honest, the audience, whether it's on a stage or in a boardroom, will fully understand it. But the staggering thing I was going to share with you is, I told somebody last week that when a band goes on tour, we still rehearse those songs, even though we've played them thousands of times. And he couldn't believe that I said that. I said, if you think about it, when we are recording and writing those songs, I've maybe played that song 400 times as I'm writing it, to craft it, to shape it, to make it, to record it as a demo, to share it with my colleagues, to go into a studio. If you were to look at my mistakes chart, which thank God they never publish. Actors like to show you their bloopers reel. I don't want anyone to see my mistakes, but you're going for a vibe, you're going for a particular part of the performance. The drummer might have slightly gone ahead, or you make a mistake, or sweat, or whatever it is. No one cares about the actual parts that took you to get there. I also mentioned a phrase that we had in the studio, which said, it's not final until it's on vinyl. So don't worry about it. Get the take right. And when it's pressed, that's the final part that you need to do. So that practice can be thousands of times. And then when you go to rehearsal as a band, you rehearse every single song, irrespective of how long you've taken it, how long you've had it and how long you've played it. And it kind of makes sense when you think about some of those artists. You might go and see Bruce Springsteen and he doesn't play one of his biggest hits, and you think, Bruce, what the hell? Some people do get bored of it. So I guess it's a case of just making sure that people understand that knowing that feature inside out is absolutely critical. And don't practice in the live situation with customers. Don't practice in front of prospects. Do it outside. Get it perfect. So, because when you get to the room itself, things like the Wi-Fi might affect you, as you found out today, like the lighting or sharing to a screen. You have to go with the flow. And part of my preparation was, I'm prepared for the unprepared. I'm prepared for absolutely anything. And as an SC, I've got tricks up my sleeve. I've got smoke and mirrors that we never reveal, but that we can get ourselves through that demo to make sure the customer has got the point as well. So that's my main ones: prepare, practice, and it's going to ultimately help you with that performance. I'm a great believer of the 6 Ps, which is proper preparation prevents pretty poor performance. And that sums both roles up absolutely for me.
Absolutely. Love that. And there's a couple things in particular that you said, Paul, that really struck a chord with me. The fact that even when you're putting together, and I love this idea of the set list strategy, when you're putting together your set list, you're thinking about your audience, right? And you're thinking about who it is that you're performing for, number one. Number two, this idea, and I've thought this for decades, which is, I want to move as much of the mechanics of giving a demo into the subconscious, so I don't have to think about it. And instead, my attention can be on my audience. My attention can be on the situation, reading the room. That's sort of what I hear you saying as well, is that
Yeah, absolutely.
you've practiced that so many times that getting the right key and the right chord and the right note and all that the mechanics is second nature, right? The
Yeah.
mechanics is subconscious, but now you're just playing to the audience,
Yeah.
right? And you're sort of playing the vibe, and you're feeding the vibe. And I've heard it said that, and I'm interested to see if you agree with this. I heard a gentleman once say that, whenever you're presenting to an audience, there's sort of an imaginary magnetic force pulling in opposite directions. And on one side of it, and in fact, he even said, imagine you walk into a room, and on one room you've got your audience, and there's a magnetic pull towards your audience, but then on the opposite wall you've got your material, your planned message, etc., and there's a magnetic pull towards that. And sort of there's this constant, it's if you allow yourself to get drawn too much to the audience, you sort of lose track of what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
But if you're drawn too much to your material, you lose track of the audience, and you lose that engagement. So it's sort of balancing that magnetic pull. Does that sort of resonate with you, even when you're playing on stage?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, it's slightly different when you've got a partisan audience, and the closest I could think of that would, we've all hopefully all been in that situation where you've been selected, you've won the vendor of choice, and they ask you to come in for just maybe to show the CFO, and you're kind of playing to a partisan crowd at that point, and there's a different feeling towards it. So that's what I would say our headline kind of shows were like, and they were brilliant. They were, you've got your own crowd there. But actually, the challenge of going to a festival, because for me, was much more exciting, because it was a little bit scary as well, because number one, they were larger crowds. I was playing, luckily to play up to about maybe 7,000, for example, was probably the biggest festival I did. But you don't know how you're going to go down. So part of what you kind of need to do, Chris, is be totally comfortable with yourself, be totally comfortable with your material. And I've said this a lot to our account executives as well. Sometimes I've heard some of them, maybe I think you talk about it in your book, correct me if I'm wrong, you talk about the competition and never bashing the competition. Feel proud of our product, stand in front of it with great glee, and present it in the way it should do. And that's what you kind of do in the music industry, because you've got to remember, you will have people in there who are blockers that you will never convert, because they've maybe worked at another company or have used a piece of software. You ain't got a chance of doing that, but you're trying to convince the vast majority of the audience. Exactly the same in music as well.
Yeah.
That you're not going to win anybody over. So never, I think in music, it was an interesting thing, because imagine, this is the one difference I would probably say between software and the music industry, is that when we release a product, it goes out into the open forum for critique. And I know that you've got a little bit of that around maybe your app on iTunes, etc. But we would literally have magazines and radio stations and journalists listening to our album and writing what they thought about it. And that is a really that is a test of strength, I'll tell you that. So in actual fact, we would get coaching from our record label that said, look, guys, don't allow your ego to get blown too much when they say you're the best thing since sliced bread, because the next review is going to come in and it's going to be rock bottom. So they were saying, don't get too high, because that way you won't get too low with the lows as well. And in actual fact, one of my favorite reviews that came in was we got 0 out of 100. And I actually printed it off and put it in my toilet, and it was always there as a reminder, because the fellow that wrote it, a person that wrote it, had absolutely no interest in that genre of music, and it was quite a laugh to read it back. So that's maybe one difference I've seen in the different kind of what am I thinking of, the kind of vacations.
Yeah. No, it's a brilliant analogy, Paul, and I'm really glad that you brought this up. I do think, and it's interesting. We're talking about being a pre-sales rock star, being a rock star SE.
Yeah.
And look, you mentioned the adrenaline rush that you get, sort of it's an addictive feeling when you're playing a song and there's somebody on the front row singing your song word for word.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think for a sales engineer, it's very similar. We love to walk in as the expert, take the stage, deliver the message, have everyone just hanging on every word. And we do, it's easy, I think, to sort of get a big ego, right? It's easy to think that we're all that. The irony is that I think part of being a rock star sales engineer is actually not thinking of yourself too much as a rock star, and maintaining your humility, and not getting too high and not getting too low, and remembering that at the end of the day, particularly in our case, in the role of sales, it really is about the customer. It's really, at the end of the day, it's about providing the information and evidence necessary to the customer to make the best decision for him or herself or themselves. And that's it, right? And so this was one of the questions. And by the way, Paul, if you can believe it, we've been at this for over 50 minutes. This time has just flown by. One of the questions I was going to ask you, and we'll probably wrap up around this: how did you maintain your humility when it just took off, when it exploded? Because I think for a lot of us, it's easy for us to get ahead of ourselves and let our egos get a little bit carried away when we become really good in this profession.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So I think partly, the way that you're brought up, it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice has always been a mantra that I've had. I'd a great family behind me that were always humble and kind. I got a faith as well, which I don't mind sharing too. That kind of gave me a good grounding. So for me, it was never about me. It was always the band. And when I'm in Emburse, it's always about Emburse. It's about the product. I mean, one thing that's probably slightly different in regards to the kind of roles is an attitude. So rock stars have, so if we compare being a rock star as in a band and a rock star as an SC, there's an attitude. So rock stars swagger onto the stage, and it is the smoke and mirrors of, people want to escape the evening. You've paid your money, you've got a beer in hand, you're ready to hear some great music. And everybody's been to see a live band, and there's probably not a person on this call, I would expect, that hasn't been to a band that's been impressed with maybe the opener that they've never ever heard of. Some of my favorite bands have come out of that, but they swagger onto stage and look the part. They look the part and they sound the part and they act the part. And in actual fact, that's something that I think is maybe overlooked a little bit in our profession, because when you walk in to meet a customer, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we get taught at IBM at a very early stage. You remember the days of IBM guys looking as if they worked at NASA, white shirts and black ties. Well, not quite that latterly, but
white shirts and blue suits. Yeah,
exactly. Be presentable, have that air of confidence, know your product. So there is an attitude, and I love something that my father always told me in the early days when I was starting to go in front of customers. He said to me, it was a real level setter for the nerves, and I've used it in music a lot, was, remember, you're the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind. And the thing is we're guilty of knowing too much. We know too much of our software. So in music, we make mistakes all of the time. And even though you've practiced to the highest degree that you can, Chris, once you walk onto a stage, and I count actually being in pre-sales as well, you're probably about 70 to 75% your maximum capacity, because of the external influences that you can't control. So what you can control is the pace of your voice, the tone of your voice, the eye contact that you're making with the audience. And don't panic, because mistakes will happen, and they happen regularly. And it's not being flustered about it. And customers do understand. People in the audience understand if you fluff a note. Most of the time, they don't even hear it. It's usually your drummer that looks your drummer looks at you. It might be your, AE. Yeah, it might be your AE who looks at you, which, by the way, is another side conversation between that partnership, is don't look at me when I make a mistake, or if a mistake happens. don't point it out and the customer will not notice it. So I think having that swagger and coming in is going to get everybody through that as well. So yeah, I think for me, controlling the ego was just about, this is what I wanted to do, and I want to enjoy more of it. And the one fundamental I would love to leave you with was, people have asked me, how did you then write the second record since the first one blew up? And I said, I didn't change what I did first time around. I just did what I did, which was writing for me. So if I'm the one who's writing the songs for me, I'm lucky that the band liked them. I'm even more humble and grateful that the audience that we managed to gather did as well. Then the same thing on pre-sales is right for the problem that you solve, and you'll be fine ultimately if you concentrate on the customer. This is the thing that's slightly different, that we could read reviews. That's why I was making the point earlier on. Somebody might say, oh, I don't like that song, so you don't write another one like it, or you try and write one that people loved again, and that's where you start to fall down. That's when the album sounds repetitive. So it's really just trusting on what's in here, and let that be your guiding light. Let that be your creative force. And the same when I come to demonstrations, I put the same amount of effort into the prep, customizing it to a customer. I'll give you a great example. So we were demoing to a police force in the United Kingdom, Scotland actually, and the Scottish police force changed the whole way that they set up. It went into one amalgamated division. And I was trying to think, how on earth do I resonate to this person, and how we charge expenses out to a particular part of the division, and just doing a little research and programming into the software an example of my local area. I said, okay, I'm out here, I'm working in this precinct. I'm going over here at the weekend to work at a football match. Therefore, I'm just giving you an idea of what it could look like. I'm going to charge the cost over here. And the customer said, that's exactly how we do it. So it's using the foresight just to think and do a little bit of research. There are so many things out there that can help you personalize and resonate with those people.
Such great words, Paul. I love hearing your stories. And Paul, I'm sorry that our hour has ended. Paul, before we wrap things up, first of all, I just want to say thank you. We've had so many great comments from Ron and Alex and Tom and Clifford, Rochelle, Melanie, Sherry, thank you. I usually try to keep up with all the comments, but they were coming in so fast and furiously, I couldn't. So, folks, thank you so much for all the comments. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Paul, I cannot tell you how thankful I am that you have spent a few minutes with us here today. I certainly hope you will come back and join us again. There's about at least 30 or so more questions that I want to ask you. Maybe even beginning with, you mentioned the AE partnership, maybe even beginning there. In our closing moments here, Paul, any final thoughts, any final words from you, sir, before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I think it's just a thank you back to you, Chris, and I can't speak highly enough about your book. It's really been a guiding light for us and our team, and it's allowed us to focus on what we do. Sometimes, no matter how often and long you've been at the game, just having someone put it in such easy to understand and read format that you can pick it up. And every time I get a request for my services, I'm probing into it, and I use that as a guiding light. So I'm sure most of your followers will have read the book, and for anyone that I'm going to share it on my socials that haven't read your book, which I'll plug again,
Thank you.
get it. Absolutely superb.
Thank you so much. And likewise, folks, I'm going to encourage you to follow Paul on LinkedIn if you're not already. Check out his pre-sales rockstar page on LinkedIn, follow his content, and check out his band. So the band that he was a member of for about 15 years was called Eden's Curse. And the most recent collection that he released was with James Labrie, Beautiful Shade of Gray, which I myself will be taking a closer listen to as well. Paul, hang around backstage just for a minute. I just want to say a few parting words before, unless you have to run. Do you have another minute or two?
Nope, I never knock back an offer to hang backstage.
Okay, I know that's a place you're pretty familiar with.
I'll get my shades on.
there you go. Get your shades on and get out your guitar. We need to do a little riff.
Yeah.
For the rest of you who hung around, if you're still with us, thank you so much, Jason King. Good to see you, gentlemen from Paycor. For those of you who don't already, I encourage you to follow #TechSalesAdvice. You'll be notified when we do these sessions. And of course, you can always go to techsalesadvisors.com to learn more about the work that I do. In the meantime, have a good week. I think I'm taking a week off from the show next week, so I should be back in a couple weeks. Paul, thank you again so much. This has really just been awesome.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks all. We will see you next time.